All right. My name is Shannon Decker, and I am the Suicide Prevention Coordinator for the Tahoe Truckee Suicide Prevention Coalition, which is housed at Sierra Community House. And it is my honor today to welcome Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, who is here to share Surviving and Thriving Through Crisis. I'm going to do a couple housekeeping items before I hand it over to Sally. So welcome, and it is Suicide Prevention and Recovery Month. The theme this month is Hope, Resilience, and Recovery. Last week, the town of Truckee put together a proclamation declaring the month to be Suicide Prevention Month and listed a lot of the activities that we have going on in the community. You can stay involved with us year-round. It's not just for the month of September. We have active social media on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We also have a newsletter that you are welcome to sign up for at the tahoelifeline.org/community. And I am always available to connect at sdecker@sierracommunityhouse.org. Mental Health in the Mountains was started by the coalition back in 2016. They had a very robust lineup for the year of incredible speakers in partnership with UC Davis. And so this was an activity that we decided to revive this year. We are launching it today with Dr. Spencer Thomas. And we have two other events taking place this month. The Community Resilience Model Training with Lori Strand will be next Monday. And then Live Through This with Desiree Stage will take place the following Tuesday. We have a handful of community trainings that we offer this month. We've got Know the Signs, virtual mental health first aid, virtual youth mental health first aid, and then online on-demand QPR gatekeeper trainings. And these are not just for the month of September, there will be ongoing trainings throughout the year. So if you're not able to make these, just stay tuned, follow those newsletters, and you'll find one that fits your schedule. Some logistics. This event is being recorded so that we can make it available on our YouTube channel following today. The video and audio. This is a webinar, so your video and audio will not work. The only video and audio you'll have is from myself and from Dr. Spencer Thomas. The chat feature is available, so you can chat back and forth. You can send people information. You can also do a private chat if you just want to speak with someone. If you need to send me a private chat, feel free. But if you do have questions that you would like for Dr. Spencer Thomas to answer, we need you to address those in the Q&A. So if you see at the very top, or actually it'd be at the bottom of your screen, there's two talking bubbles that say Q&A. That's where we're going to need you to put questions. And if we don't have time for answers today, or if there are questions that are relevant to the North Tahoe Truckee community, we can get those answered down the road. We will be having a couple of polls, and so I'm going to launch the first poll right now. Bear with me. The first poll is going to, there we go. Okay, relaunch. Here we go. It should be on your screen now. The first poll is asking you a question. Do you have the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and Crisis Text Line programmed into your phone? So go ahead and take a moment to complete that. And in just a moment, if you're not sure, or if you haven't yet, you're going to have an opportunity to do so. So now that we've got the hang of it, got almost everybody has completed the poll. I'm going to end the poll. You'll be able to see that we've got a good mix, and this is a great opportunity for us to program it into our phone. Right there, 1-800-273-TALK, 8255, and 741-741. If you've taken our trainings in the past, these should be programmed into your phone. And if not, please remember that it's not just for those who are in crisis or are having thoughts of suicide. It could be for someone who's concerned about someone else. It might not be for you, and it might not be for now, but someday that number could save a life. I also wanted to share that we are collecting hope. We would love to know what brings you hope. And so following today, we're going to have a survey for feedback, and there will be a link there to share what brings hope to you. We have some local gift certificates that have been donated to Sierra Community House to auction off or to raffle off at the end of the month. So if you're willing to share what brings you hope, you'll be entered into a drawing for some local restaurants in the area. So with that, I would like to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas. Sally and I met back in Washington, D.C. in 2018 at the Rally to Prevent Suicide, and I brought her to a conference in Boise, Idaho following that. Sally Spencer Thomas is a clinical psychologist, international keynote speaker, podcast, and impact entrepreneur. Dr. Spencer Thomas was moved to work in suicide prevention after her younger brother, a Denver entrepreneur, died of suicide after a difficult battle with a bipolar condition. Known nationally and internationally as an innovator in social change, Spencer Thomas has helped start up multiple large-scale gap-filling efforts in mental health, including the award-winning campaign Man Therapy, and was the lead author on the National Guidelines for Workplace Suicide Prevention. Spencer Thomas has held leadership positions for the International Association of Suicide Prevention, the American Association of Suicidology, and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. She's won multiple awards for advocacy, including the 2014 Survivor of the Year from the American Association of Suicidology, the 2014 Invisible Disabilities Association Impact Honors Award, and the 2012 Alumni Master Scholar from the University of Denver, and the 2015 Faribault Award for the International Association of Suicide Prevention, and the 2016 Career Achievement Alumni Award from the University of Denver's Graduate School of Professional Psychology. In 2016, she was invited to be a speaker at the White House, where she presented on men's mental health. In her recent TEDx talk, she shares her goal to elevate the conversation to make mental health promotion and suicide prevention a health and safety priority in our schools, workplaces, and communities. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Denver, master's in nonprofit management from Regis University, and a bachelor's in psychology and studio art with a minor in economics from Bowdoin College. She has written 4 books on mental health and violence prevention. She lives with her partner and 3 sons in Conifer, Colorado. And now I am proud to present and hand over the reins to Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, surviving and thriving through crisis, workplace resilience, and growth during uncertainty and toxic stress.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate all of that and all the great work that you're doing. It's very exciting. So I'm going to start off with a question, and that is, who knows who this person is? If you have an idea, you can drop it into the chat. But I bet if you didn't know it before, you know it now, right? J.K. Rowling. How many of you knew that when she was a young mother on welfare, she found herself in the pubs scribbling images of wizards on cocktail napkins while she actively thought about suicide? So one of the main messages in suicide prevention is holding on to hope and finding a way to believe that there's something on the other side of your distress. I have a couple of housekeeping items of my own today. And the first one is something that I do before every public meeting. And so I'll do it here. It's called Acknowledgement of Country. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the people whose land we are gathered on today. And I'm calling in from Conifer, Colorado at 9,000 feet up in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The original custodians of this land were the Ute people. I pay respect to their elders in the past, for they have laid the foundation for us to walk, and the elders of today who carry forward the stories and traditions. I'd like to acknowledge any First Nation, Aboriginal, Native people who are on the call with us today. We as non-Indigenous people have much to learn from the oldest living cultures on Earth. And while that's an important thing to do for many reasons, it's absolutely tied to our conversation today. Because young Indigenous men in particular have some of the highest suicide rates anywhere on the globe, and we can trace it back to the historical trauma that they experienced when they lost sacred land. I might also like to acknowledge all people with lived experience in the call, any family members or friends who've lost loved ones to suicide, people who've lived through their own suicide attempts or thoughts, caregivers and supports who've been up at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering if tonight's the night. Thank you so much for being here. It's truly an honor to be with you. And I always like to start my presentations off by pausing and thanking you. thanking you for turning some of your darkest days into the knowledge and skills and passion to help other people. I'm very grateful that you're here. I'm also very grateful for Shannon and her perseverance and incredible organizational skills to motivate communities to come out to have these really important conversations. It's always a pleasure to partner with you, Shannon. And I love that picture of us at the Capitol. It makes me so filled with like passion and excitement. I'd also like to just nod over to our funders and the people supporting our program today, the Katz Amsterdam Foundation and the Placer Nevada County funding, underwriting this and many other efforts. Thank you so much for making this possible in your community. I do know for some of you who might be new to this conversation about suicide prevention, especially those who've lost loved ones, that sometimes when we talk about this kind of stuff, feelings and memories come up that you may or may not have been ready to have today. And so if you find yourself just feeling uncomfortable or overwhelmed or triggered by this, please, please take care of yourself. That's the most important thing. Shannon will have a number of resources to follow up with you if you need that. Just let us know that you're going to step off and that you've got a plan for self-care. I am in all the places, most of the places on different social media platforms. And I really, really love to connect with people. I'd love to hear what you think. I'd love to hear what stuck out for you, what you're doing. I'd love to learn more about what's needed and all of that. So connect with me wherever you are. I do have monthly Twitter chats. Last month's chat, we had over almost 900 people globally participate and 70 million impressions. It was very cool. This month's chat will be later this week on Thursday night at, let's see, it would be 5 o'clock your time. And our topic is with some of the leading medical and public health experts on what the science is on how concerned we should be connecting the COVID pandemic with the possible increase of suicide. So if you want to tune in and ask some questions for our national experts, please join us. I have a TED Talk, as was mentioned. It's really about storytelling and using the power of stories to change culture and give people hope. And I know that many of you may have this untold story within you. And so please also connect with me there. And so we could talk about that because that's a really powerful, underutilized tool in the work of suicide prevention. And then finally, I have a podcast. It hosts a lot of the thought leaders from around the world talking about some hot topics on suicide prevention. You can capture it wherever you listen to your podcasts. Shannon mentioned that I do this work for a number of reasons. This is the main reason. This is my younger brother, Carson. Carson was a 34-year-old business leader, father of 2. And by all external accounts, he was very exceptional and successful. And he also fought fiercely against depression. His bipolar condition, in the end, proved to be fatal. And so he's the reason I get up every day to do this work. We, in our acute grief, resolved to do bold gap-filling work from preventing what happened to Carson from happening to other people. And he is the inspiration behind what I'm doing. So we're going to start off with our first polling question from my side, which is, how many of you have ever heard of before today the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention? Have you ever heard of these things before? The national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. And it's okay if you haven't, because for me, that's exciting. We have a really strong pre-post finding from whatever this is to whatever we're going to be at the end, because I'm going to cover quite a bit of this. All right, how are we doing with our percentage?
We're at 76.
Perfect. Why don't we go ahead and close that? All right. I'm actually really impressed with all of you right about now. 40% was higher than I anticipated. So great news. For those of you who were familiar with it before, we have a new exciting thing that we added just last week, which is a badge program with the national guidelines, which I'll explain at the end of today's session. All right. So where are we headed? We're going to talk a little bit about this perfect storm of stress that we all find ourselves in now, and just some things that we can do to try to keep coping simple. We're also going to talk about what it looks like to lead a culture of resilience during this time. And I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. Now, in preparing for today's talk, we did ask registrants what their burning questions were, and we did get a number of questions about helping youth. So while that was not originally part of the scope of today's talk, I wanted to make sure to address those needs. So I do have a couple of slides that address that. All right, this graph is something we've been living through. Many of us have been living through since February and early March. This is SAMHSA, so a federal agency, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. They've been tracking communities' kind of emotional responses after large-scale community disasters and traumas. And this is kind of what tends to happen. Now, of course, COVID, the pandemic, the social unrest, the natural disasters, we have unprecedented community disasters happening one on top of the other. So it may not all pan out like this, but this is how it tends to go. If you can think back to, again, January, February, March, when we saw this thing coming, we had this long tail of anticipatory anxiety. And we did all kinds of weird stuff. We went out and we hoarded toilet paper. Like, how did that become a thing? And then we stood in Costco for hours trying to fill up our carts with stuff we didn't even need. And we were just super anxious because we didn't really know what was happening. And then when it started to hit, you saw all kinds of heroicism. And there was really an initial sense of, even though it was fueled with adrenaline, this sense of pulling together and celebrating our community heroes. I don't know if it's true where you are, but here at 8 o'clock at night, we all leaned our heads out the window and howled in support of our first responders and other essential workers. People were making masks. People were delivering food to the older residents in their community. And then, end of May until now, we have been in a free fall of disillusionment, discontent, conflict, and hardship. And it is a long, drawn out fall. And hopefully, Shannon and I were talking about this, hopefully soon we're going to start to see some evidence of reconciliation and reconstruction. And through that process, hopefully, we will also learn a great deal from our experiences here. And I can hear some of you say, Sally, those modelings, that's all nice and good, but I've had all of those feelings like in the last 10 minutes. And that's true for a lot of our emotional models, is that we oscillate between all of these states. So if your experience is the one on the right, all tangled up with all kinds of feelings, you are in good company. That is also quite normal. But the truth of the matter is, many of us have been under toxic stress for a very long period of time. Now, I want to clarify, stress in itself, not bad. In fact, if we didn't have stress, we would be really bored and we would be really unfulfilled, because a little bit of good stress in our life kind of makes us strive to improve. It helps us tackle really difficult challenges, helps us stretch ourselves, and all of that's really good for our human capacity and growth. But we haven't been in that part of the stress curve for a while. We have been, many of us, on the de-stress side of the curve, where we have felt strain and fatigue and breakdown, and what we're now starting to label soul exhaustion. So you might have some of these soul exhaustion symptoms. If you are finding that your sleep, no matter how many hours you get, is not relieving your fatigue, that's a sign of soul exhaustion. Too much, too long, too ugly of the stress response. If you find that you just feel disconnected to other people from a lack of empathy, or just feel like you're filled with dread, these are all signs of what my dear friend Sarah Gear has coined soul exhaustion. And so part of what's going to help us get through this toxic stress is about being mindfully intent on creating sources of resilience through this. And it's hard work, because we don't have a lot of energy and we don't have a lot of positive things to look forward to. We have to work really hard to try to find everyday things that we can be grateful for, when it just feels like there's so much against us. But this is what we need to do. Because yes, we have kind of a perfect storm upon us that continues to grow with every new natural disaster and every new social unrest and an upcoming election that's proving to be one of the most divisive ever. So we have this perfect storm of discontent, uncertainty, isolation, disruption in every single part of our lives. And yes, we have early warnings that this is not going well for people. I mean, understandably, but we have some early warnings that are specific concerns for suicide. We have already have evidence that we have an uptick in alcohol purchasing and consumption, increased calls to domestic violence. We actually have decreased calls in terms of child welfare, and that's not a good sign because it's usually because the kids were not in school, which is where they were getting identified. So we have a lot of kids now that have been living in abusive and neglectful situations. We have obviously a lot of disruption in employment and increase in firearm purchases, which, let me be clear, firearm purchasing does not increase suicidal experiences, but if you're suicidal and you own a firearm, you're far more likely to die. So these are all concerning pieces. And yet there's some of us that are unwilling to say with certainty that our suicide rates will go up. And the reason why is because we also know that when we forecast and predict certain types of narratives, we can actually start to create a self-fulfilling prophecy that then people live into. We also know that through some of our worst disasters and wars, that our suicide rates have actually declined, that sometimes we find ways to pull together or find other protective factors, some silver linings in situations that really help us grow. So we can hope for the best while we prepare for the worst. Now, that said, I know we have some workplaces and people who are leading families and communities and athletic teams and all kinds of things here. And so one of the things that leaders can do when we are in a traumatic situation is try to provide the antidote. So trauma and toxic stress wear on us because they feel unpredictable, they feel very unsafe, and they feel out of control. So if you're wondering what you should do, how to respond to help lead through resilience, these are 3 things to really think strategically about and see if you can offer a lot of opportunities. So for example, do we know how this COVID thing's going to ride out? Do we know what the economy is going to do in 2 months, 3 months, a year? No, none of us have any clue. But here's what you can say. You know what? I can predict that tomorrow at 9 o'clock, we're going to have a briefing on a new wellness program, or we're going to have a brown bag lunch on how to help your kids going back to school. Giving people opportunities to predict what's coming up in their future, even the most small things, can help them get a sense of control back. Safety, right? Do we know how this thing's going to morph and mutate, and do we know when the next wildfire is going to be? No, we don't. But we can really work hard to provide our communities with psychological safety. Put up expectations and boundaries that people treat each other with respect. Call out and squelch any kind of rumor mill or gossip or harassment or discrimination. And provide people with an opportunity to share what's going on for them in their heart. Maybe they do that anonymously through surveys, or maybe they do it in small groups, but really working hard to provide that sense of psychological safety. And then the third piece is about control. We feel trauma because it's very out of our control, and it can really shatter all of our assumptions about how the world works. The way we regain control is we offer people opportunities for what we call self-agency, the ability to choose, right? The ability to choose things gives us a sense of control back. So do we have the ability to choose a lot of things right now? No, we don't. But we can actually build in small opportunities for choice all throughout the day with our loved ones. Do you want to sit over here or sit over here? Should we do this tomorrow or that? ABC options that people can have that are, maybe mundane, but that sense of choosing gives us a sense of control back. So all of these are just little tidbits as you're thinking about how to respond that can really help people feel better about living through toxic stress. All right, let me shift gears now and talk a little bit about why workplace suicide prevention is now a very hot topic. After my brother died, there were a number of us closely related and connected to him, friends and family, that in our grief tried to figure out what our gap-filling efforts were going to be to prevent people from dying by suicide. And unbeknownst to me at that point in time, I learned that the majority of people who die by suicide have never stepped foot in any kind of mental health services. And the majority of people who die by suicide are working. Well, that seemed really important, right? So if we're not getting them through our mental health system, we need another system that can maybe reach out to them. And the more I dug, the more I realized the workplace is the most cross-cutting system. It's the place where most people, most adults are most days. And yet the workplaces were not doing anything back in the mid 2000s, anything at all related to suicide specifically. So another psychologist and I created a gatekeeper training called Working Minds back in 2007. We were so excited. We rolled it out and we were like, yay, suicide prevention in the workplace. Everybody get really excited. And nobody cared. Not one person in the early days was really excited like we were. And we did a lot of head banging to try to get people engaged. And then this study came out. This was a study that originally came out in 2016 by the CDC. They've now had 3 different reports that have come out ranking industries by suicide rates. And this has been a real game changer because now we could point and say, look, we have some industries in particular that have very high rates of suicide. Now, let me make a couple of really important points here. Number one, you can see this is for men. All right. And the reason why we separate out the men and the women is because about 80% of people who die by suicide are male. And so if we mush everybody together, we actually lose the women's data. So we pull the men out. So this is true for everybody. It's also true for the men. And you can see these are all male dominated or mostly male dominated industries. Oil and gas and mining, construction. That other service is a hodgepodge bucket, but it includes things like automotive services and personal services like barbers, farming, fishing, forestry, transportation, which includes rail, trucking, and air, et cetera, et cetera. Once these data came forward with such rigorous credentials from the CDC, then we had some evidence that we could really target some of these industries. Now, let me make another point, which is this is industries that have been hit hardest by suicide death. There's a number of other ways that people are impacted by other forms of suicidal behavior, like attempts or thoughts or caregiving for people. And so we're starting to see other industries that might not have as high of death rates come forward that maybe are impacted by attempts or thoughts or caregiving, things like the healthcare service or the service industry, entertainment industry, and so forth. So there's a lot that's starting to happen here. And I went from banging my head against the wall to having people try to engage with this to being overwhelmed, especially now during COVID, with the amount of people really hungry for information. For those of you who are new to this conversation about suicide prevention, this is a very important model to understand. And if you're going to read one book to try to understand the experience of the suicidal person, I really recommend that you read this one. It's by Dr. Thomas Joyner. He's a psychologist out of Florida State University, a brilliant thought leader that has done tremendous amounts of research internationally. He developed this model back in 2005, 2006, and it's had quite a bit of engagement with researchers all over the world. So it holds a lot of water. And Erica, yes, we can provide that ranking slide, no problem. So let me just kind of break it down for you a little bit. It's important. It doesn't explain all of suicidal behavior. There really is no one model that explains everything. And also that the actual model is far more complicated. This is the simplified version. But you'll see that it really helps people understand a little bit about how people get there. All right, so first, the purple bubble is big. And that's because a lot of people consider suicide when they're going through very, very hard times, when they're feeling hopeless and overwhelmed. It is not uncommon that the option of suicide gets on the menu. We just don't know this about each other because very often people don't disclose. We now have evidence that somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 million people seriously consider suicide each year. All right, that's not just the fleeting thoughts people, that's the seriously considered people. So this is a common way. And the way that people get there is that they're in so much pain that the only way that they can think of to escape their pain is to die. And there's 2 common pathways that people come to a place where their pain is overwhelming. Thomas has labeled them this way. The first one he calls perceived burdensomeness, the idea that my death is worth more to the people who love me than my life is. Okay, I become such a burden that people will be grateful if I'm not here. Now you can think about that from a financial standpoint or maybe someone has done something that they consider to be shameful or humiliating, or maybe people have a health condition or a mental health condition or an addiction that they feel has been burdensome to their loved ones. All right, that's some of the common burdensome themes. The other piece is what he calls thwarted belongingness. You got to forgive him. He's a researcher, lots of syllables in the word, hard to say, but it's an accurate description. Thwarted belongingness. We are hardwired to be in connection with people, whether that's a community or relationships that are super important to us. And when those relationships are taken away, or when we lose them, or we want them and we can't get them, then that also is very painful for us. So those two things together are driving a lot of the suicidal despair. This is what we now call the I want to part of the equation. I have a desire to die, or a desire to escape my pain. But people don't actually become at risk for suicide until they have the other part of the Venn diagram, which Thomas now calls capability. This is the I can part of the equation. Luckily for us, we're all developed into this world with a self-preservation instinct. We fight to survive, we fight to stay alive, we don't have to think about it, which is a good thing, or we wouldn't have a species. But there's some people who have a little bit of an ability to be a little more fearless about death and dying or dangerous situations. They can stare it down. It doesn't upset them as much as it does other of us. Some people are hardwired to be a little bit more risk-taking, a little bit more reckless. My brother was one of these people. He would always climb to the top of the tallest tree when he was a little kid, making my mother take him to the emergency room for broken bones and stitches constantly. He was a very aggressive athlete on 3 varsity sports when he was in his mid-20s. He was a very risk-taking entrepreneur who went toe-to-toe with large companies and their lawyers. He had no fear about anything. And when it came to his death, he was less afraid there as well. He had one attempt and it was fatal. So sometimes people are hardwired to be more fearless, and thank goodness we have them, or we would have no warriors, entrepreneurs, pilots, emergency room physicians, first responders, most of our professional athletes, right? People who do all kinds of risky things all the time. Not a problem. And we're grateful that they exist because they do stuff many of us couldn't do. But when they get thoughts of suicide, they can have very lethal attempts. So hardwired is one way that people have capability. Another way is that they have had a trauma history. They've experienced painful and provocative experiences where they've walked the path of kind of life and death situations, whether that's any certain kinds of abuse or combat or early childhood traumas, sexual traumas, etc. Those also increase risk. Trauma is very connected to the risk of suicide. It's kind of like you got thrown off the horse, you get back on the horse, you're less afraid of the horse. It's a familiar path that you've walked. And again, thank goodness we have all kinds of people resiliently coming through experiences of trauma. However, when they get thoughts of suicide, they also have more capability. And then the third way is that people know what to do. They have access to and knowledge of lethal means. This helps explain why physicians have higher rates of suicide, because they have access to and knowledge of how to use certain types of medications lethally. It also explains why, again, firearm owners have higher rates of suicide. They have access to and knowledge of. All right, so this together, where these things overlap, this is where we have increased risk of a suicide death. And what the opposite tells us is what we need to do for prevention. Now, on the capability side, not a whole lot we can do about people's hard wiring. We can't undo the fact that they have a trauma history. We can't undo knowledge or skills about lethal means. We can try to reduce access, but it's hard. There's a lot of cool stuff we can do on the purple bubble side. We can really focus on helping people feel connected and that they matter. And whenever I get people who are really stuck with someone that they don't know how to help, I'm like, get creative in those two areas. How do we get them connected to people that can, bring them in and give them hugs and let them feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves? And how do they find a way, no matter how bad it is, to contribute to something bigger than themselves? So I just wanted to address this too. I know there's a lot of concern about youth and young adults, and for good reason. When I first started showing the slides of ranks of death, which is what this is. So you can see the left these are the top 10 ways that people die. And over the top axis, you can see those are the ages. So we've got kids, teens, young adults, middle adults, and older adults. And when I first started showing this slide, youth and children, this was like the third or fourth leading cause of death. And over the years, we have seen a fairly drastic increase. Why this country is not completely up in arms over this is just beyond me. We still are, in many ways, very desperately seeking the adequate funding and research and resources that we need to stem the tide here. But this is a very concerning trend. I should also note that this is a US issue. This is not a global issue. Other countries are seeing suicide rates go down. And in some countries, they're seeing suicide rates go down very drastically and quickly. And but we're not here. So we need to be humble and look at what some of the other countries are doing. And one of the major issues is that we have the wrong story here in the United States. Our story is almost entirely that suicide is a medical issue that needs to be seen only by medical professionals or licensed mental health professionals. And while that can be helpful, there's a lot of other things we need to do to really make a difference. And one of them is look at some of the environmental drivers of despair that we have, whether that's the economy or the horrible ways that we treat each other, and start there. So I also wanted to just address a very exciting thing that California has been leading that is now being expanded across the nation and into Canada. My good friend Stan Collins founded this program called Directing Change. Stan lost his best friend when he was a high school student, and so he's got passion for empowering youth to really make a difference in their schools. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I hear that it's coming to your counties, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of what it's all about. The reason I love this program so much is that it really empowers youth to lead this effort with their creativity. It is a video film contest where they have several months to put together a public service announcement, or just a short 1 or 30-second video, 1-minute video that is very effective in shaping a conversation about suicide or mental health. And it's a competition, so it makes it really fun. So I just wanted to share with you what's coming and what the quality of some of these videos are. And for those of you who are not working with youth, we can all take a page from the chapter of these youth and their creativity and how they have learned to target their messaging to their population and really have those voices shine through. Much more effective that way than experts or people with a bunch of degrees after their name, is to get your own community to talk about this in an effective way. So here's the youth and one of the winning videos. Can you hear it? Okay, hold on. I did a Zoom newbie mistake. Oh, it is on. Okay, sorry. I thought I couldn't hear it. I was nervous. I'll go back. Here we go. Sorry. Back again.
I used to just let everything build up inside me. All the negative thoughts, emotions, everything. I just let it grow and grow until it became too much. I began to lose interest in my favorite hobbies. My grades dropped. I pushed all my friends away. It was like the depression was scribbling over who I was. But then I noticed I wasn't alone. So many people shared the same signs of depression that I was living through. I couldn't allow anyone else to feel how I did. So I talked to people that shared the same signs. I let them know my story. I helped them feel a little better, and knowing that I made a difference even helped me. You can make a difference too. Learn the signs.
Great stuff. Very excited about that program. All right. I also want to just address briefly the, again, concerns we have about the very high rates of suicide in our LGBTQ plus populations. We are very focused on youth, but also we have increased rates throughout the lifespan. And again, I just want to make the point that it's not enough just to get people to counselors. We have to do a better job about addressing some of this unimaginable discrimination and trauma and minority stress that these groups are feeling that is driving tremendous amounts of despair and rejection in their communities and in their families. So there's a lot of effort now to also create safer schools for transgender teens in particular. We know that when our youth have had a number of traumatic experiences, sometimes it just takes one caring adult to make a difference for them, both at the time of that they're in their youth, but also throughout their lifespan. All right, let's do a polling question now that's a little bit more sensitive. I always like to get a sense from my audience what the lived experience is in the group. This is anonymous and confidential, what Shannon is sharing with you here, and you can answer as many as fit for you. So have you lost a loved one, a friend or family member to suicide? Have you lost a coworker? Have you been a support person or a caregiver to someone who's been fighting to stay? Have you yourself had thoughts of suicide, and have you had a suicide attempt? This is always very eye-opening to the communities that I present to sometimes, because you can't often see this. You can't see this on people's faces or know this about them unless they share this with you. All right, how are we doing in terms of percentages, Shannon?
We're at 70, or at 81%.
All right, let's go ahead and share it. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. Now just take a look at this. Wow. 65% of you have lost someone very close to you to suicide. 58% of you have stood by, standing shoulder to shoulder while people are trying to stay here. 6% of you have attempted, 29% of you have had these thoughts. So one of my takeaway messages throughout all of this is to really assume that somebody's had some kind of personal experience with this. The overwhelming majority has. And when you make that assumption, you behave very differently than if you think that it's, oh, those other people, or it doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen in our family. It doesn't happen in our community. It doesn't happen in our workplace. If you make the assumption that, yeah, a lot of people have been impacted by this, you'll say things differently. You'll think about things differently. All right, let's move into the main part of my talk today, which is about workplace suicide prevention. Now, I'm sharing this with you because this is what the homepage of the National Guidelines for Workplace Suicide Prevention looks like. So when you get there, I want you to recognize it like, oh yeah, I remember seeing this. All right, this is an evolving set of guidelines. It was never meant to be like a 200-page PDF that got dusty and dated. We want it to be interactive, and we want all of you to take the pledge to be to help make suicide prevention a health and safety priority at work. So again, I'm going to come back to you, I think, at the end with a 30-day commitment. So as we go through this, think about what's one action step that you can take in the next month that will move us forward, right? If I finish this whole hour-and-a-half thing and nothing changes, oh, we're all disappointed and we've all wasted time. So I want you to be thinking about what you can do. What's one thing you could do in the next 30 days to make a difference here? Now, the guidelines are really framed around this idea. Some of you who are involved in public health might recognize the upstream, midstream, and downstream parable, but I'll just briefly explain it. So if you're walking along and there's someone drowning in the river, well, you're not going to waste any time. You're going to jump in and try to rescue that person. And then all of a sudden there might be another person and another person drowning in the river, and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed. So you call out to everybody you can hear, help me, we've got people drowning in the river, and everybody comes a-running, because that's what we do when we have crisis. Everybody comes a-running. Now there's everybody in the river, and people are thrashing about. People are trying to rescue the drowning people. It is overwhelming and it is exhausting, and we can't save everyone. There's a bunch of people that just float on by because we don't have the resources. Well, somebody gets a bright idea. How about we swim upstream a little bit, try to teach people how to tread water? Well, that sounds good, but in actual practice, turns out it's a little hard to learn how to tread water when you're drowning. You're fed up. You throw your hands up in the air, you jump out of the river, and you start running up the banks, and everybody in the river's like, excuse me, where are you going? We got people drowning in the river. And you say, I'm going upstream to figure out who's pushing all these people in. that's the shift that we need to have in suicide prevention. We have a lot of downstream focus about how to rescue people from the brink. And yes, we absolutely need to show up with our best game, our hotlines, our well-trained clinicians, all of that. But that's not going to get us in front of suicide. We've got to look at how do we normalize a culture of help giving and help seeking? How do we bolster and inoculate resilience in our communities across the span? So that's just what it looks like on the individual level. We also are looking at what it looks like at the systems level. All right, knowing this, these three national partners came together: the American Association of Suicidology, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and United Suicide Survivors International. And we pulled our thought leaders and our resources together, and we did a couple years of looking around and try to figure out what would work. Australia had a workplace suicide prevention position statement. Canada had psychological safety standards. We like, well, we better get with the program here and have a set of guidelines for ourselves. So we did focus groups with all kinds of stakeholders: HR, employee assistance programs, employment lawyers, executives, and a lot of people with lived experience. People who had their suicide attempt or their suicide loss during a time when they were employed. And they got equal footing at the table when we said, how'd it go? What did you wish you had? How did you wish your employer worked with you? Did they do anything well? What do you wish that they had in terms of resources? And together, we created these national guidelines. There are 8 guiding principles, which I don't have time to cover today, but I do wanted to share at least a few of the 9 guiding practices. These are very tangible action steps that employers or professional associations can take to make a difference. Now, they're organized here upstream, midstream, and downstream. So the top row is upstream types of tactics, midstream in the middle row, downstream is the last row. And I'm going to walk through a few of these. All right, if we focus on upstream, we are trying to bolster protective factors. Bolster protective factors and reduce the toxicity in our environment that drives despair. So these are things like getting leadership, whether that's informal, people with influence, or formal positions of leadership, to drive culture change, to drive a caring culture. We also need to address psychosocial hazards, just like we do physical hazards. We need to address the psychosocial hazards, and we need to develop an effective communication strategy. So today, with just a brief period of time, I'm just going to cover a couple of these. With leadership, it's important that we find bold leaders who are willing to raise their hand and get up in front of people and say, this matters. Suicide prevention matters to our mission. Suicide prevention matters to our community. Suicide prevention matters to me. And if they have the ability to personalize it into why it's important to them, things go really well often. They also need to think strategically and how they're going to bake this work into other places where health and safety show up. It's much better to do a slow drip over time than to do a one-off training or a one-off awareness day and figure you've checked the box. So I've worked with some very creative people. I work a lot in construction space because, as you saw earlier, they have very high rates of suicide. When I was first starting in 2013, I went to my colleague. He's a COO of a large construction company here in Denver. And I said, tell me about health and safety culture in construction. And he looked at me all furrowed brow and he said, Sally, everywhere, all day, health and safety is a huge priority in construction. I was like, all right, great. Tell me, what does that look like? And he said, all right, fine. Toolbox talks. And I was like, what the heck are toolbox talks? And he said, it's like this ritual that we do around the world before every job site gets going in the morning. We have the community of workers come together. We do like a stretch and flex, or we walk through, here's how to use this piece of equipment so that nobody gets hurt. I said, perfect. Let's create a whole bunch of toolbox talks around mental health, suicide prevention, resilience, and so forth. So that's just one example. I want to charge you to think creatively about where health and safety shows up in your workplace and how you might be able to braid in ideas around suicide prevention. Leadership can also look at policies and resources. Sometimes there's unintended consequences from these things and we need to just tweak them or get rid of them or replace them. Leaders are also really important around messaging of reassurance. I had the privilege of working with the Denver Fire Department for a number of years, and I really appreciated the fact that the chief at the time got up in front of his entire 1,000-person department and said, yeah, of course, me too. I've had periods in my life where I've been overwhelmed and I needed to reach out to gain perspective on my issues. It's made me a better leader and a better father and a better firefighter. And so if you ever need help, if you are ever struggling and overwhelmed, come to me. I got your back. And I'll persist with you until we figure out how to get through this together. That kind of messaging from leadership is really essential in creating a sense of trust and psychological safety in a workplace. If a leader, like my chief, had any kind of form of lived experience, sharing just a little bit of that story. The chief did not disclose any juicy details. He just said, yes, I needed help. I reached out and I'm better. That's a pretty good narrative, just right there. If a leader is able to share that, that usually goes so far in changing culture that we start to have all kinds of ripple effects. People looking up to that leader see this is what's modeled, this is what's recognized, this is what's reinforced, and then other groups starting to look over, start to shape their behavior as well. This slide is overwhelming by design. It is all of the psychosocial hazards, or most of the ones that we know, are connected to the risk of suicide at work in the research, right? Peer-reviewed journal articles sharing that when we have these issues at work, we have increased rates of suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, suicide death, all right? And I've organized them around certain types of themes. We've got job design challenges, which are like job insecurity, job variety, job autonomy problems, what we call effort reward imbalance. I feel like I'm working so hard, but I'm not getting anywhere, whether that's financially or advancement. We've got lots of toxic relationships that happen at work, bullying, hazing, harassment, discrimination, prejudice, all of those things showing up at work. We've got all kinds of family disruption, family spilling over into work, work spilling over into family. And now that we're all working from home, hello, that got exacerbated a lot because it's right there in our face 24/7. We also have people who don't feel connected to this larger mission. They're showing up every day and it's a grind. And they often feel like they're a cog in the wheel of something that they don't care about. That's just making somebody else money. And then there's all kinds of other health impacts that are really serious and important to note. Probably the top of my list on that one is sleep disruption. The more we learn about sleep disruption, the more we learn that it is directly connected to suicide risk. Let me just say that again. The more your sleep is disrupted, the more likely you are to have suicidal thoughts, attempts, and death with no other variables in between. It's a very important finding because people are cavalier and even boasting about the fact that they don't sleep. And yet we have this very powerful connection. So all of these things are connected. And when we look at mitigating some of those psychosocial hazards, it's really important to think at the systems level, at the environmental level, that we can be far more effective than at just the individual level. All right, let's talk about the communication strategy. We just finished up National Suicide Prevention Week and World Suicide Prevention Day. So that was September 10th. The week was last week, ending on Sunday. We're still in Suicide Prevention Month, and often we'll see a lot of activity around communication. And my thought that I want to part to you here has a lot to do with this picture. Bake it in, don't bolt it on. Sometimes we get very excited about these awareness days and weeks and months and flurry of activity, but we have not embedded it into other things that we're doing. And so what we often get is this state trooper effect. While we're in it and everybody's talking about it and the posters are up and the PSAs are on, we're paying attention. But as soon as it goes in our rear view mirror, we go back to doing whatever we were doing before. That's the state trooper effect, right? We change our behavior when the state trooper's in front of us. Hi, I'm going the speed limit, I promise. Boom, there in the rearview mirror, back we go. So that's what you want to avoid if you're really trying to be effective. So how do you get around that? You really look at how to integrate these communication pieces everywhere. Recognize and reward people that are doing the right thing about advocating for mental health, or really showing and demonstrating values around developing a caring culture, or whatever. You can get really creative on how you want to drive this forward. One of the things that I would also encourage you to do as you're trying to put these communication strategies together is go look at some of the best practices on shaping that communication. There is a website called Suicide Prevention Messaging that walks you through best practices in language, but also how to shape a positive framework. Now, some of you might be scratching your head like, Sally, how is this possible? Shape a positive framework around suicide? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, yeah, it does. Yeah. So one of the things we fall into as a trap is that we just pound the drum of death data over and over and over again. There's people dying, there's people dying, there's people dying. And I get it. It creates a sense of urgency, but it does not inspire hope. So we've got to balance that kind of communication out with communication that says, you know what? Most people who get treatment for depression get better. Or the majority of people at our workplace would help someone out when they were experiencing suicidal thoughts, would be willing to lend a hand or an ear. Or, the majority of veterans who get to the VA are not dying by suicide, right? So we can start to talk about resources that are helpful or intentions of help. We can also share stories of hope and recovery and resilience and peer support. And all of that starts to drive a different narrative. Now, going back to what I learned from my construction contractor, toolbox talks, slow drip over time, repeatedly presented over the course of someone's career or in different locations. So as COVID was hitting, we developed a series of toolbox talks, or coping cards as we called them, that were just small action steps on what you could do to help yourself or help someone you cared about. And we would roll these out 3 at a time over the last several weeks. We'd also take what we call the pulse check. Every 6 to 8 weeks, we would reach out to the community that we were working with, and we were like, hey, how's it going out there? Is it better or is it worse than it was a couple weeks ago? What's helping? What's hurting? What do you need? 3-minute survey, repeatedly dosed over a course to the community, gave us information on how we could pivot to meet their needs. So we had a lot of anxiety sometimes in certain communities in March and April, a lot of frustration when all the mandates came and people weren't allowed to do the things they wanted to do, a lot of concern about kids as they started to go back to school, and we could pivot in our content. So again, this is an idea that you can use, glad to help, but it's been very effective so far. All right, so those are kind of upstream things. Midstream is about how we catch things as early as possible, and then present a buffet of resources that people can get involved in. All right, think about other health issues that we have, right? With cancer, for example, we teach people, we empower people to screen themselves, right? Because they're going to be the ones to catch things earlier, whether it's from testicular, prostate, or breast cancer. We want people to be self-empowered to take ownership over their health. Same thing here. So we encourage self-screening, anonymous and confidential self-screening for things like depression, alcohol use, suicidal thoughts, and so forth, so that people can monitor themselves. Should I be worried about myself or not? And sometimes we can do that well, and we're still going to have people that find themselves in precarious positions. Same with the cancer one, right? So we also want to have this stratified training. And I was so excited to see when Shannon put the opening slides up that there's all kinds of training opportunities for this community. Really important, just like CPR, that as many people as possible get trained regularly, redosing all the time. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And I'm very encouraged and inspired by a lot of the effort that's happening in our communities and emerging in our workplaces about developing an advanced peer network that has a little bit more skill and knowledge to be that liaison between people and advanced care or advanced supports. All right, let's talk a little bit about the stratified training program at the workplace. So a lot of workplaces offer CPR training to their workers every year to 18 months. People regularly get it. Most people don't use it. And a lot of times when people use it, they actually don't save the life of the person that they're resuscitating. So why do we do it? Well, because it saves some. It saves many every year. And if we didn't do it before we had this, people just died. So we all agree that a little bit of an inconvenience of regular training to save a couple of lives or save, lives matters greatly. You can also get suicide CPR training and decide on that day you can't do it for whatever reason. And that's okay. We've come to accept that that's okay, because somebody else is going to raise their hand and say, I got this. And they're going to move in and try to save that person's life. All right. So it's the same idea, except instead of a heart attack or drowning or whatever, it is a psychological crisis that's happening. We need to train as many people in a workforce or in a community as possible, redosing that training, realizing that not everybody's going to be able to do it when called upon, keeping it fresh, right? That's the CPR level. And then we also need what we call the EMT level, that advanced peer network of another strata, smaller group of people that have a lot of passion to help and really want that higher level skill set. Now, some of the ones that we recommend here are things that Shannon has already presented. QPR, question, persuade, refer. Safe talk is another one that's kind of at that CPR level. We have another one that's specifically for the workplace called Working Minds. It's very similar in its model, but it's very specific workplace oriented for managers and also frontline folks. And then we have the advanced one that offers an advanced, more deeper dive training like ASSIST or mental health first aid. And then at the top, we have our mental health professionals. And we need to make sure that they are also getting regular state-of-the-art evidence-based treatment training, so that when we do that warm handoff, we've got a good chance that they're going to make a difference. So again, to summarize, suicide prevention gatekeeper training, like the ones Shannon announced at the beginning, are like CPR for suicide prevention. We're keeping people's eyes on the playing field, looking for people who might need additional support, having people feel like they can move in with confidence and competence to sustain someone's life until we can do the warm handoff to other supports that can really help them stay. All right, I'm going to cover just a little smidge of what these trainings look like, because I know people are hungry for this information, but just know that this is not adequate, what I'm going to do here, and that really it's important to practice these behaviors. But I also know some of you in this audience are probably worried about someone right now, and I want to make sure that I give you just enough to get this going, but so you can start to see what more training you might need. As you start this conversation about suicide, there's a couple of things that are really important to know. One, your nonverbal makes a lot of difference. So it's very important for you to get as centered as possible. Take some deep breaths, drop your voice, slow it down. It's also really important to be side by side with someone or at their level. Find a place that's quiet and private to have this sensitive conversation. Now, when you think about a conversation about suicide, you should think about it as like an upside down pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid, you're trying really hard to get them talking. And the way you do that is you work to earn their trust and create space for them to talk. Now, a lot of us get really uncomfortable about suicide, and we just want to make it better, and we want to talk the person out of it. Like, you wouldn't do anything crazy, would you? And like, don't be thinking about that. And that's not helpful. What's helpful is authentic connection with them. Really staying present with them and listening to their story. That's what's going to get you that trustworthy relationship where you're going to much more likely to get good information that you can then work with. Really restrain yourself from offering judgment or advice or problem solving, especially in the beginning part of the conversation. Give them space to talk. And if you have to say something, I really want you to monitor yourself. If you're talking too much, just stop talking. But if you have to say something, just reflect back what you're hearing. Like, yeah, that sounds really hard. Or repeating back key phrases like, she left with the kids. All right, whatever you're hearing that sounds like that's a really important piece to reflect that back directly. It's going to be uncomfortable for most of you, unless you're regularly working a hotline. These conversations don't come up very often for most of us, and they're uncomfortable. They're nerve-wracking because we are talking about life and death. They feel taboo. It feels intrusive. Do it anyway. Feel those feelings and do it anyway. There's a big myth that if we talk about suicide, we're going to put it in someone's head. I'm going to tell you that's not the case. When people have suicide on the menu, and I already alluded to, even our middle schoolers are experiencing this, and you connect with them with an open and genuine, authentically caring conversation about suicide, your chances of decreasing their suicide intensity go way up. Now, in a longer training, I would go into a lot more depth around this. I just wanted to give you some highlights of what a conversation around suicide looks like. Again, you get calm, you create a safe space, and you start to share that you've noticed some things that are different. I've noticed that you're not yourself lately, and I care about you. And I really want to be the person that you can talk to about these. And then you can say, can you tell me more? And whatever they tell you about how they open up with you, you can express gratitude. Thank you so much for sharing this. I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I may have gone through something similar, and I'm here for you. Now, as you're listening, you're starting to pick up on some of these warning signs and risk factors. Increased substance use, maybe they're going through a divorce, maybe they're throwing out what we call invitations to the conversation, saying things like, I just can't do this anymore, or why does this matter, or who cares? Those are all invitations to go a bit deeper. And when you hear that, you should open the door for the possibility of suicide. You know, sometimes when people are going through really hard times like you are, open the door. Sometimes they also are thinking about suicide. And then you loft off the question like a softball. I'm wondering, is this true for you? You can even indicate that you understand how some people can get to this place of hopelessness. I know sometimes people think about suicide because it's the only way that they can see how to get out of their pain. All right, so sometimes you're going to get no's. Sometimes you're going to wonder if that no is really a no. Sometimes that no is fluctuating within the person. Sometimes they're upset and offended. You just stay with it. Sometimes you got to go around that bend more than once. And if they say yes, you say thank you. Okay, first words out of your mouth, thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for that gift of our relationship. All right, they're expecting you to freak out and judge them. You say thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, then next words out of your mouth, I got you. I got your back. We're in this together. Some kind of expression of collaboration or partnership. And then finally, I have some ideas of things that we can look at together. Again, the whole thing about this is you're empowering them to get back into to owning their life and building a passionate life. Try not to freak out, because if you get agitated, if you get anxious, the chances are good that they're going to shut down. Stay as calm as you can. Try not to hot potato people, bounce them around from person to person. What often people who are experiencing suicidal intensity need more than anything is connection. So when we bounce people around, they feel that whole sense of worthlessness just gets reinforced. And as paradoxical as it is, try not to champion a life worth living. All right. You can see it often. You can see it for them. Sometimes they can't see it for themselves. So when you come in and say, oh, no, you don't want to do that. That's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, or that's just a this or that or the other thing, or that's a crazy thing to do, or you wouldn't want to do that. You have so much to live for. You've got a beautiful family and so much potential. All right. Hold the pain with them. Hold the pain with them. Create enough space where you can listen to the things that are driving their despair. Don't cut it off, because usually they're saving the big one for last. Listen to their reasons for dying, but listen for their reasons for living. They're still here. There's something there that they're living for. When they give it to you, then you can have them talk about it. Right? Tell me about your kids, or tell me about this dream you have. Very important not to interject your ideas of why they should be living. Let them come to it themselves. And if they say yes, you should have in your pocket 5 ideas of things you're going to do to help connect them to some kind of resource that's going to build out their safety net. And so Shannon, again, had highlighted a number of these at the beginning. You should have these in your phone: the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Crisis Text Line. For workplaces, people should be intimately familiar with your EAP. Not like, I think I got a brochure during orientation, let me go find that. But no. The EAP comes regularly and does brown bag lunches. People are familiar with it. It seems like a friendly, accessible resource. You might also consider warm lines that might be local, peer-to-peer lines, or sometimes people find benefit from talking to a spiritual counselor or their medical professional. Have a bunch of ideas in your pocket that you could bring out saying, okay, how about we try this together? How about we call the Lifeline together? I can start it with my phone. I can hand the phone to you. You can start it. I can step out. Again, that choice and empowerment thing. And then you can be part of the safety network. You don't have to be their counselor. It's not your job often in a coworker situation to be a therapist, but you can follow up and say, how about we meet again for coffee on Friday? I want to know how it's going. I want to know how those referrals worked out for you. That one thing of following up and sending caring messages is so helpful for people to know that you care enough that you're willing to do that. Shannon shared a bunch of this. I just want to give you a couple more details. So it's free 24/7. There is a chat version on the Lifeline. I don't recommend it. It's pretty bogged down, but the phone is great. There is a veterans line. You press 1, you get connected to the Veterans Crisis Line. They can get Spanish speakers quickly. They can get any interpreters on fairly quickly. And then I have a different prompt for my crisis text line. Don't worry about it. It all ends up in connecting you to a texter who can the crisis text line is fast. It can get back to you fairly fast. So these are really good. All right, so this is now downstream, all right? And in downstream, what we're doing is we're making sure that we've got the right resources and the right approach for people who are in crisis. And in order to do that, you've got to vet your resources and really see if they're adequate, right? A lot of our mental health resources, this is a little known secret, are not adequately prepared for someone in a suicide crisis. And sometimes less than prepared providers get very anxious and they hot potato people. So for those of you who have an employee assistance program, go kick their tires, call them up. Grill them a little bit. When was the last time your providers had any kind of training on state-of-the-art suicide risk assessment, management, and recovery? How often are they having this training? What's your approach for working with people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts and behaviors? And if the thing is, I call 911, ask them, is that the best practice? Because often there are other options that we have that are not so restrictive and traumatizing that we can work with the person and keep them out of the hospital. And just take a gut check where you're calling them. Would you want to go to this resource? Would you want to send your kids to this resource? Because if it seems very burdensome administratively, that people do not have good answers for these questions about how to help someone with suicidal intensity, there are lots of EAPs out there, employee assistance programs. And we really encourage you to go find the top tier ones. It's not an expensive benefit. You can get all kinds of support that maybe your current EAP does not offer. And then should you have a suicide death that impacts your community or specifically your workplace, it's really important that you have some steps in place so that you can respond rather than react. And so one of the things that is also part of the National Suicide Prevention Guidelines is this crisis guidebook, a manager's guide to suicide postvention, okay, what we do after the crisis, postvention in the workplace. And it's written like a crisis manual. So there are checklists, there's 10 action steps, there's templates for communication. How do you communicate to the workforce that this has happened? There's flow charts, and it walks you through from like the moment of the death notification and the first couple of weeks to the first couple of months, as people might still be harboring some of the complex grief and trauma that suicide evokes, upwards to a year, right? We give people 3 days in our workplace sometimes to get over their grief. But I'll tell you what, if you're a parent that's lost a child, yeah, it's going to take a lot longer than 3 days. It's going to take a lot longer. Even for coworkers who lost a cherished friend and coworker, it takes a lot longer than 3 days to get back on your feet. And sometimes people have tremendous amounts of anxiety coming into that year anniversary of the death. And we just need to be mindful of that and figure out ways to help people cope and honor the life that was lived, honor the service that was given, and just walk people through that grief process. So that's another resource to come. All right, so let me move into next steps, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions. Action step for all of you is to take the pledge today. Go to workplacesuicideprevention.com and take the pledge to make suicide prevention a health and safety priority. Once you become a registered pledge partner, then you get access to all kinds of details around those 9 practices that I just shared. And just to make it fun and rewarding, we follow our own advice. We recognize and reward the employers and the professional associations who are demonstrating these action steps. And you can earn badges as you go through that then you can share publicly on how you're taking steps to become more suicide informed. And it's a light lift. We didn't want to make this first pass anything that was daunting or scary. I will tell you, we have a more formal certification process in the works that hopefully, knock on wood, will come out in 2021. But for now, to get started, this is a way to get in the pool. And then again, demonstrate that you are taking this seriously. All right, to summarize, where do you begin? One of the important things to do is to listen. Just like we're listening one-on-one with the people that we're worried about, we should also listen to our workplaces. I do a lot of consulting with different size organizations across a lot of different industries. And tragically, they're often coming knocking on my door now because they've had a loss. And they're like, can we do a training? Can we do a training? And I'm like, whoa, how about we breathe for a second, grieve this person's loss, and then build a strategy that is very much based in culturally resonant tactics and approaches to your community. So at the beginning, it's really important to listen. We usually offer an organization-wide survey followed by focus groups and in-depth interviews where we start to build trust and get buy-in into the process of having a workplace strategy. And then when we have organized that data, we can feed that back to the leadership and say, here's what your people told us. Here's where things are really good. Here's the resources they really appreciate. Here's where stuff could use some improvement. Here is the drivers of their despair and distress. Here are the action steps that will make a difference. And by the time we get there, like the leadership's bought in because of the data, the people have bought in because they were part of the process that built it, and it works a lot better. It's a lot more sticky. So that's step one. Listen, build a strategy, not just a one-off training or a one-off awareness day. Engage your leadership. Find the champions, again, formal or informal, people of influence who can move this forward because they're passionate and they understand why it matters. Then kick the tires of your policies and resources. See if there's stuff that's broken out there that needs to be fixed. These resources need to be really well vetted because sometimes we got one chance. We got one chance to connect people to the right resource. And we need to narrow the window of having it be a hit or miss opportunity. And then training, as we mentioned, ongoing, repeating, culturally resonant training, and then a thorough communications plan, not just one day, but all year. All right, I have a couple of minutes for questions. So did anything come through, or do you have a question, Shannon, that we could use to get us started?
We don't have any questions right now. So if you have a lingering question, please feel free to drop that into the Q&A. I don't have a question, but I do have a couple add-ons to connect what Sally's just presented to our community. So connected to directing change, which is part of the Each Mind Matters campaign, which runs the Know the Signs campaign. The Tahoe Truckee School District will be standing up a new suicide prevention program. And so this is a prediction. This is something to look forward to, even though nothing is concrete yet. Hope Squad is a program that is based on QPR training, and it will be coming soon. We don't know exactly what everything is going to look like and what the timeline is, but it's coming. The coalition also has QPR seats. So if you have an organization that you would like to look at starting trainings, we can support you with QPR. We could also help you out with some Know the Signs campaign materials or a Know the Signs training. In the future, we will have Safe Talk trainings available as well. Those are just not available at this time. And along those notes, I wear several hats aside from just the coalition here in Truckee. And last week we had some pretty exciting news from the United States Ski and Snowboard Association. They have committed to training their staff and recommending to their athletes and their families that suicide prevention be embedded. And so they will be working with my other organization, Speedy Foundation, to stand up QPR trainings. So if that is something that you are interested in learning more about, that's something the coalition can definitely help you with. Another thing to note is that the Tahoe Forest Health System has stood up Zero Suicide, which is a healthcare initiative. They've been working with the state of Nevada to implement that. It is a long process, but we will start to see some changes quite quickly when it comes to healthcare and suicide prevention. So those are some of my announcements that I wanted to just connect to. And
So cool. I
questions.
told you she's a powerhouse. Like, woohoo, go Shannon. Like, lots of good stuff happening. So we had a couple things come in. I'll address these and then we'll go to close. So great question. How do we enroll champions when stigma is so heightened? Just wonder what that would look like. What it looks like is stories and science. All right. We've seen this work in all kinds of other stigmatized areas like cancer, all kinds of things. Stories make this a human thing. They're everyday people with lots of different aspects of who they are, who have lived through this, who have lived through loss, who have lived through attempts. It's their humanity that helps us connect and see that we have far more common than we have difference. All right, so finding storytellers that have powerful stories to tell. The other piece is science. This is also what helped us get through stigmatized views around cancer. You know, it's not a moral failing, actually. We can see things on brain scans. We can also show that when people get this kind of treatment, they're often better. So using those two tools. Now, you don't have to convince everybody, my anonymous attendee. You just need one. You need one influencing person in a system to make a huge difference. They often are able to then get others on board. So if that's you, you can start to galvanize some others to join you. And thank you so much for being here. All right, let's see. We've got questions about directing change. And so you just heard some of that. Absolutely share. So if you want to go to their website right now, it's directingchangeca, so California.org. And there are just, I think at this point, probably hundreds of videos like the one I showed you that are so powerful and that you can share publicly in different types of arenas that you have. And then we have another question. What is your advice about trying to help someone who doesn't think they need help or won't take suggested steps? Yes, that's a very good question also. So what you can often do, which is true, you can say, I need help helping you. And you can model reaching out for resources, again, in collaboration. I need help helping you. I need to understand what our team here needs to do next, and that you're the one who needs help. That is one way to get around it. And the other is always leave the open door. That follow-up piece is so important. Like, I know you're telling me you're fine. I can hear that. And I know that you want to be fine. But I also see stuff that's worrisome to me. And I just have to say, I care about you so much. So how about we meet up again on Friday for coffee, right? That follow-up. And then the final little piece of gold that I'll share with you is this thing called non-demand caring contacts. Non-demand caring contacts are just like what they sound like. They're small, tiny pieces of communication that you can text somebody that you're concerned about that just says, I care about you. I love you. I miss you. I see how strong you are. You know, you matter to me. That's it. Little tiny bits of caring connection that don't ask how you doing or did you do the thing or are we going to do the thing? They're just, I love you. I see you. I connect with you. And randomly sending those to people that you're worried about can make a huge difference. So in closing, let me just wrap it up. If everybody could put a 30-day commitment in the chat and just say, what's one action step that you might take? Maybe you're going to take one of those trainings that Shannon was talking about. Maybe you're going to go to workplacesuicideprevention.com and take the pledge to make suicide prevention a health and safety priority at work. Maybe you're going to read Thomas Joiner's book or go get the post-prevention guide. What is one thing that you're willing to do in the next month? Go ahead and drop that into the chat. And I will go ahead and close. You all know what this is, right? It's an architectural marvel in your beautiful state. And oh, great. Somebody's going to look into working minds training. Thank you very much. This is tragically, as you know, a magnet for suicide. But it's also a vision of hope. There have been hundreds of people that have been rescued off the bridge. The California State Patrol has been trained in how to go down and get engaged in those conversational things that I was just sharing with you. They have followed people for over a decade and have found that 90 to 95% of them did not go on to die by suicide. So it makes a difference. Stepping in and having those difficult conversations make a difference. There's somewhere in the range of 36 people that have jumped and lived. About 8 of them have been interviewed extensively. And while there are no universal narratives for suicide, some people wake up really pissed off that they lived. All of these 8 say the same thing. When they were asked what happened when you let go of the rail, they all said, I had instant clarity that I had just made a major mistake. As I was falling, I saw that my problems that I thought were not solvable were, and I decided I wanted to live, but it was too late. None of those 8 have gone on to die by suicide, and Kevin Hines is one of the most passionate suicide attempt survivors who advocates every day for wellness and a passionate life. So the story of the bridge is really a story of hope, that even after we have crossed some of the most lethal thresholds around suicide, that we can bring people, that people can bring themselves back to a passion for living. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate all of that connection. And let's see what other people are doing. Yes, this is hard to see, Erica. I know the bridges can be very triggering. I'm so sorry to hear about your daughter. We can access slides and yes, use that upstream, midstream, and downstream analogy. The website workplace.org. Okay, thanks, Shannon. I appreciate that as well. All right. So please stay connected, and I wish you all the best in your suicide prevention efforts.
All right, Sally, thank you so much for being with us today. For those who are still on the call, if you know who those champions are in our community who are ready to talk about mental health, to share their story, or to advance training throughout their organization, I would love for you to connect me with them. And I'm also seeking out trained providers. I want to know who in the community is taking on, they're not afraid of the word suicide, and they're not going to hot potato someone, who has taken AMSR or CAMS care. And if they are a clinician who's interested in becoming trained in best practices, the coalition does have some seats for the virtual CAMS care training. So if you know who this person is in our community, you're welcome to reach out and connect us. Again, I will follow up with a recording of this and a whole bunch of other resources. So thank you for your time and your interest. Our next Mental Health in the Mountains speaker is going to be Lori Strand. She's going to be providing the community resilience training model for us. Now, this comes from a book study that the coalition started on, the trauma stewardship book. That was something that we did last year, and then at the start of COVID, we had the author come and speak, and a lot of the questions in the comments were, well, how do you take this from theory into practice? How do you regulate your neurosystem? And so this is a 2-hour workshop that will be teaching you the community resilience model techniques, and there will be more tools for your toolbox. CRM trains community members to not only help themselves, but to help others within the wider social network. The goal is to educate and create trauma-informed and resiliency-informed and focused communities that share a common understanding of the impact of stress and trauma on the nervous system. Using this skills-based approach, an individual's nervous system can become regulated and resilience can be restored, increased, and strengthened. So I hope you'll join us and share that with those in your circles. Our final speaker at the end of the month is Desiree Stage. She is a survivor of a suicide attempt. She is a proud mom. She is an advocate for the LGBTQ community. She is an artist and a social justice warrior. So I hope you can join us.
Awesome. What a lineup. Well done.
Yay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Sally. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.